welcome back to the MLB portion of the Daily Academy at dailyfantasycafe.com. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson. You can follow me on Twitter at BChad50. And as I said, this is the MLB research portion of the Daily Academy, and really this lays the groundwork for making or losing money in daily fantasy. And having a sound research routine is going to be integral in being a long-term, profitable, consistent winner in MLB DFS. If you are flying about willy-nilly, have no plan, have no consistent attack, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to consistently win in MLB DFS. You can't be throwing things together at the last minute. You need to have a research routine, and you need to not compromise from this routine. Once you find your balance, once you find what is right for you, tinkering from what I suggest today is fine. Not every research model should be necessarily pigeonholed, and you might do things a little bit differently and maybe mix your steps up just a little bit. But point being, the suggestions I'm going to make today are a great foundation for getting started and tweaking to fit your needs, to fit what you have time for, to fit what is most comfortable for you is certainly suggested. I start my daily research by identifying probable starting pitchers, and it seems simple, but I can tell you after a few years of writing, I've made the mistake of checking probable starting pitchers at a website such as ESPN or Yahoo, only to find out that their information was maybe just a couple hours off, and there was a late scratch due to pitcher being under the weather, experiencing discomfort in a bullpen session, something of that nature. And all of a sudden, I've wasted my time researching hitters against a pitcher who's no longer slated to start. So I often suggest going to MajorLeagueBaseball.com's official MajorLeagueBaseball.com and checking their probable pitcher page. Basically, that's going to be the most up-to-date. It is Major League Baseball's official website. Every now and again, if a pitcher is going to be promoted, say added to a 40-man for a roster, they will have a to be determined, and you can dig a little bit around the internet, maybe check some sports wagering sites to see if they have the scoop on who is expected to start. Do a little Google research, but more often than not, MLB.com is the best place that I found to go for probable pitchers, because they're going to have the most up-to-date information. After I do that, it's real simple. I next move on to checking the Vegas lines. It's a great way to start weeding out which pitchers and which games to target for pitchers and which games to target for hitters. Simply put, if there is a low betting total, most likely I'm not going to be picking a lot of hitters from that game. Vegas or odds makers, if it's an online sports book, don't expect high scoring, and that's bad news for offensive options in daily fantasy. You need these runs scored, you need the RBIs, you need the homers, you need all the goodness that comes with fantasy point scoring. And if odds makers have a low total on it, the odds of those things being available for hitters in that game are very low. Conversely, I don't want to target pitchers from games with high totals most often. Remember, these are rules of thumb. Every now and again, you do some research, you see that maybe there's a segment of the game that looks good. Maybe there's 2 or 3 hitters on a lineup that should produce the vast majority of the offense in a low total, and they make for a decent target for whatever reason, maybe pitcher splits, ballpark factors. But that's a good starting point, and at least gives you a foundation to start kind of weeding out players who you don't need to look into deeper because they just don't make sense to. There just isn't a lot of upside there. And then you can start digging into more in-depth things such as ballpark factors. This is something that I don't need to check quite as frequently as I did before. Every now and again, I will check to see what doubles and triples park factors are. But after researching for a few weeks, you'll have a pretty good idea of which ballparks are homer friendly, which ones suppress home runs. But if you're just starting MLB DFS, you need to be looking at park factors until they are ingrained in your brain. It also doesn't hurt to check them on occasion if you are fairly familiar with them. Every now and again, ballpark factors do change. My favorite source for this is statcorner.com. They use a rolling 3-year average, so you're getting a larger sample size. Every now and again in season, you get some flukiness within the park factor, so I like to look for a bigger sample. But It's definitely a huge part of MLB daily research, because the better scoring environments are going to be your better places to grab hitters from. And as you'd expect, the better pitcher, more pitcher-friendly environments that you're in, the better venue for selecting pitchers from. Next, I'm going to go ahead and look at pitcher splits. I'm going to see if a pitcher is fairly strong against lefties, righties. If they don't have a notable platoon split, maybe they're good against both handedness of hitter. Those are the ideal pitchers that you want to get. They're usually your elite pitchers. But every now and again, you can find some gold. Maybe a Mike Leake, who is very tough on right-handed batters, but not very good against left-handed batters, is facing a very righty-dominant lineup. Well, that's good to know, and you're going to find that by looking at these pitcher splits. On the other side of the coin, maybe he's facing a very lefty-dominant lineup, and you're immediately not going to want to use Mike Leake, but you may want to grab a stack from the other roster. You may want to hook and pair some hitters from that lineup, knowing what the platoon splits are. This segues nicely into looking at hitter splits. You're going to want to see which hitters dominate lefties and which ones dominate righties. When you analyze hitter splits, you might find some nice platoon situations. You might find a guy like Seth Smith, who really struggles against lefties, but he's facing a righty today, and he's very good against righties. His price is depressed as a result of his numbers being dragged down a little bit by lefties, and also due to the possibility of him getting lifted for a pinch hitter late in the game if a lefty's brought in to face him. But you won't know this unless you look at these hitter splits, and you want to kind of cross-reference and try to find hitters whose favorable platoon split lines up nicely with pitchers who struggle against that handedness of hitter. This is why these two things are kind of interconnected. When you're looking at pitcher splits and you're looking at hitter splits, you're trying to mesh hitters who are strong against the handedness of a pitcher that struggles with that handedness of hitter. For instance, getting back to Mike Leake and Seth Smith again. Seth Smith hits righties hard. Mike Leake struggles with lefties. That's the kind of match made in heaven that you're looking for when you're analyzing these splits. Something else you can look into if you're analyzing pitcher splits, especially if it's a pitcher who's been with the ball club for a few seasons, you can look at their home road splits. I don't use them as much as I use the lefty-righty splits, but you might find that a pitcher, fly ball pitcher, for instance, is very good at a home run suppressing home ballpark. Maybe your San Francisco Giants pitchers or some pitchers from the Padres who pitch in these spacious ballparks that keep the ball in the yard tend to fare better at home than on the road. Maybe you have a unique case like Jorge De La Rosa, who for whatever reason pitches better at Coors Field than on the road, and has a track record of that. It's not a single season fluke type of thing. You want to look at usually multiple years of data. The guy's new to a team. You shouldn't be terribly concerned with, say, 5 road starts and 5 home starts and what the splits look like. There's just not a big enough sample size to glean much useful information from. So it is another split that you can dig into. Once you've dug into these splits and you've kind of identified which players you're targeting, who you're targeting at pitcher, who you're targeting at hitter, it's good to tier your favorite plays for the day. And by that I mean, and if you're a season-long gamer, you'll understand this concept as well as anybody. Who are your very favorite plays of the day? They need to be in your tier 1, your top tier. These are the guys that you want to roster the most. If you're using multiple lineups, these are going to be the guys that have the highest percentage ownership on your rosters. Then below that, you're gonna kind of group your next favorite hitters. Maybe the guys that have some warts that you don't like quite as much. Maybe this is where you find Seth Smith because you worry about him getting lifted for a pinch hitter. He's not in your top tier, but his price point, the matchup look favorable enough that he's in your second tier. These are going to be your next most rostered group of players. And then maybe you add a third tier of guys that you kind of like, you don't love, but you want to get some exposure to. Maybe it's a guy who is in a homer-friendly ballpark, has kind of a tough pitching matchup, but you really like the park factors. You really think that there's a chance that they could hit a home run, and that would help your GPP roster immensely. These are going to be guys that maybe are only on a roster or 2, not on a lot of rosters. But what you're doing when you tier these players is making sure that you have a grasp on who you like the most, It forces you to think more critically. And when you're building your rosters, it allows you to kind of mix and match players from these tiers and try and get yourself the most exposure to as many players from your top tier as possible. As you're mixing and matching these guys, you might find that some combinations work a little bit better than others. And by having it in front of you, by having it in an easy to dissect sort of way, you are really just giving yourself another means of catching yourself from making a rash decision, not getting all of the, or just an uneducated decision where you fail to use all the research that you had. I mean, you've researched these guys. Make sure that the ones that you like the best are the ones that you're rostering the most. So that's a good way to do that, is by tiering your favorite players for the day. Another thing I like to do, because I do play at multiple daily fantasy sports sites, is check pitcher prices across the daily fantasy providers. You might find that DraftKings has a pitcher that you really like priced significantly cheaper than FanDuel. If that's the case, pretty good bet that you're going to want to get more action on DraftKings that night. Conversely, maybe DraftKings has jacked up the price on a pitcher that you really like, but FanDuel is a little bit slower to react. They haven't jacked up the price. Maybe that pitcher is a little bit cheaper. It's a one-pitcher format, and that's the one pitcher that you really like for the day. Get more action on FanDuel. If you're cross-referencing these prices for pitchers, you're gonna have the maximum opportunity to get the most exposure to the pitchers you like the most. And maybe there are some days where pricing's similar enough that you really just want to get action at both sides, split it 50-50, and that's fine too. It happens. But every now and again, when you're cross-referencing your pitcher prices, you're going to find that one site stands out clearly above the rest as the best destination for you to get your daily fantasy sports action that day. The final piece of advice that I would give is to mix and match your favorite picks on rosters, especially if you're going to be playing in multiple GPPs. In cash games, having some consistency between lineups is good. You don't want to enter too many lineups because it minimizes your chance of really winning big for the day. But in GPPs, you want to mix and match your favorite plays, because there's nothing worse than identifying a number of tier 1 hitters, really liking a few, and then for whatever reason not getting the exposure to the one hitter who goes nuts and hits 2 home runs in a game, drives in 5 runs, and because you were so fixated on just a handful of your top tier players, you missed out. By mixing and matching your favorite picks from your tier 1 with some bargain picks, it's going to give you maximum exposure for that big game and allow you maximum opportunity to really win or win big in these GPPs. So make sure you're mixing and matching. Get some of your top picks on the same roster and try and get as many of them as you can. But obviously, a lot of your top picks are going to be pricier, so it's not always possible to get all of them on the same roster. And that's why it's really important to mix and match your favorite plays. And on that note, that's going to wrap up the MLB research portion of the Daily Fantasy Cafe Daily Academy section. Stay tuned and check in at dailyfantasycafe.com on a daily basis. We have great podcasts going up and great articles going up that are going to help you win big in daily fantasy. Until next time, I'm signing off. Take care and good luck.